me and says all this stuff, and I think, yeah, but I'm just Willie Bearden from Rolling Fork, you know. And I remember when I was a senior in high school, I was walking down the hall one day, and Lawrence Mullins, who was the principal there, mountain of a man, he came up to me in the hall, kind of grabbed me he would kind of grab you by your neck, you know, kind of pinching me a little bit, and he said, Willie Beard, you are never going to amount to anything if you keep running your mouth. So today I would like to say, Mr. Mullins, I turned 74 years old yesterday. And I've been running my mouth for 74 of those years, I think, and people pay me for it. And so I think, you know, sometimes when we don't know what to do with people, that's a problem. So I don't think they knew what to do with me. I want to talk a little bit about Elmwood today, and then I want to tell you a little bit about me at the very end. But I do not work for Elmwood Cemetery. My lovely wife, Kim, is the executive director of Elmwood Cemetery, and she does such a great job. She's been there for 25 years and has been the executive director for 20 of those years. And she found herself kind of in a rundown cemetery there that needed infrastructure and money and things like that, and she just started working toward things. And one of the things she started working toward was to open the cemetery up to everybody. And I know that sounds strange, but like I did a documentary on Elmwood in 2002, so 22 years ago. I would drive over there, and sometimes I wouldn't see anybody for the 2 or 3 hours I was over there, just nobody. And this place is 80 acres, you know, and 80,000 people buried there. So nobody was coming to the cemetery. So she made that her goal, is to get this place populated again with living people. And so she started just doing a number of things, and I think one of the best things she did was to start her cradle gardening program. We're going to talk about this for a second. This is the bridge going over to Elmwood. It's a beautiful place. You're kind of in the middle of the city, though Elmwood was built actually 2.5 miles outside the city when it was built in 1852. And it was initially 40 acres, and then they added another 40 acres. But this is where you come in. This is where she gets to work every day. This is the cottage, and this is a Victorian Carpenter Gothic architecture style. I've never heard of that. I have no idea what that means, but I hope you do. It's really a beautiful place. You can see it, but it was built in 1866. And so they're always having to do some kind of maintenance on the thing, but it is beautiful. She gets to work there every day. In 2000, they built a chapel across the street from there, and this place is so beautiful. These are places that people can rent for funerals. People get married there all the time. And somebody asked her one time, they said, "Was it weird somebody's going to get married at the cemetery?" She said, "Well, think about it. 50, 60 years ago, everybody got married in a church that had a cemetery in it. So, you know, the thing that's strange is that people don't get married at the cemeteries anymore. So it's a really wonderful place. And the statuary there, it's called a Victorian Rural Cemetery. And when this started, Queen Victoria, of course, went into mourning that she never actually came out of. And her husband, Prince Albert, I think he died in, you know what, I don't have the year, but it was probably the late 1850s or something. And she was in mourning for the rest of her life. And she lived, you know, to the late 1800s. And but what she did is, back then, most of the cemeteries were like, you'd look at the monuments and they would have maybe a skull and crossbones. And it was a foreboding kind of place. It wasn't a place of beauty. So what the Victorians did, they elevated death to something beautiful, because it is your walk to heaven there. So it really made sense of how they looked at death. And also, this is the kind of cemetery where you can put any kind of monument. I say any kind of monument. You cannot put SpongeBob or anybody like that up here, okay? But you can put, your own kind of monument there that reflects who you were in your life. So this is probably, she said, it's the most kind of undemocratic place you can do, but people's personalities still come out in the way they see themselves. So we're going to see a few of those things too. They have the Soul of the City tour there, which is the costume tour. It's coming up on the 10th, I can't read that, the 11th and 12th of October. And what you do is you buy a ticket and you come in and you walk around with a group of maybe 30 people, and you go to these different places and you have characters who tell you the story of who they're standing in front of. And it's really a fascinating thing. I help her write the scripts, and I think we've got some good scripts this year. I have been pulled into a lot of these things myself. Elmwood is old, but it's not full. Today, so many people are being cremated that it's completely changed the game as far as death goes. Instead of having to buy, a one plot thing, you can bury 8 cremains, as they call it, on one plot now. So it opened up a whole lot more. You don't have to buy a whole plot just to bury ashes. And so many people are doing that now and going in and buying 2 or 3 plots, and then you have a family lot there. And so it's really changed, and it's only changed, started changing up north probably 15 years ago, and really it's kind of crept south, and it's really happening a lot. I think probably about 30% of her burials now are cremations. And, people feel different ways about that, but we see a whole lot of that now. There are places there that tell the story of Memphis. People say to know Memphis, you must know Elmwood. And this is a hero from the 1878 yellow fever epidemic, Dr. R.H. Tate. And he was an African-American doctor, the first African-American to ever practice in the state of Tennessee. But he came down from Cincinnati when he heard about how many people were leaving Memphis and how many people were dying from yellow fever in Memphis. And in the 1878 epidemic, it was, you wouldn't have believed it. About 2/3 of the people in Memphis, the population left, just left, never to come back. Of those who stayed, over 5,000 died. In Elmwood, they have a common grave that over 1,800 people are buried in, because they were having 200 people a day die during this. And if you can imagine that, and this is before anybody had a backhoe, somebody was having to dig those graves, and so they dug a big trench grave and they just buried people and covered them up as they could. They did the best they could. Memphis lost its city charter. It was no longer a city, and didn't get that. So this was 1878. They didn't get the charter back until the 1890s. So probably 15 years in there where Memphis was just a taxing district for the state of Tennessee. It almost wiped Memphis out. There are veterans from all the wars buried there. This man is Colonel John Smith, and he fought in the Revolutionary War, but he died, I don't know, in 1810 or something like that. And you would say, well, Elmwood wasn't open until 1852. How did that happen? Back in the early 19th century, people would bring their dead with them. If they moved, they would disinter people, put Papaw in the wagon, and they would go to wherever they were coming. So many people who died years before are then reinterred in a place like Elmwood, which is always strange. I walk around there sometimes, I go, how, this guy died in, 1820. And so, well, they brought him with them at some point. So a lot has changed. Also, if you've never heard of the wreck of the Sultana, anybody heard of the wreck of the Sultana? Okay, yeah, you got it. Yeah, that is the largest marine disaster in American history. More people died on the Sultana than they did in the Titanic crash there. And what happened, though, is they don't know a lot about it because a couple of days before, Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated. So that was all the news stories in newspapers. There was one little thing in the New York Times about the Sultana. I mean, this happened in Memphis. This thing was so overloaded, it had over 2,000 ex-prisoners from the Civil War aboard. They were trying to get home to Indiana and Ohio and Illinois. And the Sultana was raided for about 600 people. They had over 2,000 plus livestock on there. And the boiler blew up just north of Memphis and killed over 1,700 people. So some of those people are buried in Elmwood. There are lots of Civil War veterans buried in Confederate rest there. And I'll tell you this story. So there were lots of Union soldiers buried there too, because there was not the system of national cemeteries at the time. After the Civil War, they started that. That was the beginning of national cemeteries. And the first one was Arlington. One of the next ones was in Memphis, and it's out off Jackson Avenue on National Street. And so what they did is they came into Elmwood because there were about 1,200 Union soldiers buried there at Elmwood. So they came in, disinterred everybody, and they wrote on the caskets that person's name, whatever their army number was, where they were from, when, all the information they had, they wrote on the caskets. So they had 1,000 of these or more sitting up. But that night it rained, and they had written it in chalk. So the National Cemetery in Memphis, Tennessee has more unknown soldiers than anywhere other than Arlington. Isn't that crazy? I mean, oh, for the lack of a Sharpie. I mean, it just blows my mind that somebody would come in there with chalk and do that. You can imagine somebody woke up in the night with, it's raining. So they have several hundred veterans there that are completely unknown. And there was really no way for them to figure out who this person was. So yeah, that's how that got started. Elmwood also have 2 Chinese sections, because of course the Chinese came here to help build the railroads. And as they went along, as immigrants do, they find a place to stop. And they see a need. And like especially the Chinese, they had built the railroads here, but down in the Delta, and the Delta was probably the latest place that people started really going in, like right at the turn of the 20th century. There weren't many people living in the Delta. All of a sudden, they got the train going through there, and they started having some roads so you could get around other than being on some kind of paddle wheel boat going up the creeks or the rivers. So as that happened, these immigrant people started thinking, okay, well, let me open a grocery store. Let me open this. And so that's why, like down in the Delta, you look down there, and the different ethnicities in the Delta, you just wouldn't believe it. I've told people, I said, I grew up with Chinese and Syrians and Italians and Greeks and everybody down in the Delta. I thought everybody had grown up with people like that, but they hadn't, But in the Delta, since it was kind of the last frontier in this part of the world, that's what happened. So they have that, and we have a big Greek section there, Italian sections, all this. And then, I guess getting back to what I was talking about, people's personalities coming through. Kim knew this woman, and her daughter, they were out there doing what they call a pre-need. You know, you go and you talk, okay, we want to buy a one burial plot from you, and then, you know, they always say, well, if you want a headstone, you know, we have a couple of people that we recommend, whatever. And the lady said, I don't want a headstone. And said, her daughter said, well, you're going to have a headstone. She said, well, I don't want a headstone. That's, you know, I'm not going to know if it's there. I said, well, you're going to have one, Mama. So she says, okay, well, I'll handle it then. So she did, but her daughter didn't know what she had written on there till after the lady had passed away. And here's what it said. Daughter, Dorothy Ann Whitaker. Born, who knows? Died, who cares? You know, and so I tell you that people's personalities come through. You know, I mean, you know people like that, right? You know somebody who would do that, right? And I think it's brilliant. You know, in any other cemetery, they wouldn't let them have that. You know, but they've got that there. So I do love that. We're going to talk a little bit about the Victorian cradles. The Victorians believed, like I used to call these bathtubs. You know, I'd say, well, these are the bathtub graves. She said, well, they're Victorian cradles, because the Victorians believed that as a child of God, your body rests under this thing, right? You're buried there. But your soul rests on top. So when your Savior comes, you are right there on top, right? So that's why they did these things. And then families would come out, and it was just such a common thing. Like, in fact, going out to Elmwood, there was a trolley line that ran out to Elmwood till the 1940s. And people would come out on Saturday and Sundays and have picnics, you know, there in the cemetery, and they would you know, go fix the flowers and do their gardening and stuff. And then, you know, families die out. Nobody's around who's kin to these people anymore. And so Kim saw that she had over 2,000 of these Victorian cradles. And so she got a couple of master gardeners, these 3 women that she knew, and she said, I don't know what to tell you to do, but let's see if we can do this. They have no running water out there, so you got to haul your own water. And so that, you know, that's a huge thing. She said, I really don't have the money, so you're going to have to buy your own plants. I will give you topsoil and mulch and stuff like that. That's what we can do. So over the last, I think it's now either 6 years or 7 years, over the last few years, she has signed up well over 200 gardeners who have adopted, and most people will adopt 3 or 4 of these, or at least 2, you know, and so they're working on probably 1,000 cradles now. And you drive through that place, and it is just, it's amazing what it looks like. I mean, you see that? Isn't that something? And people, you know, and the gardeners love it. People said it kept them alive during the pandemic. They could come, you know, it was someplace it was safe to come. You're outside. People got to know the other gardeners and stuff, and they would always swapping information back and forth. Well, does this grow well? How do you do this? And all that. So it's really worked well for them. And that's right. So they started this in 2018, so 6 years. And they made notes, the master gardeners just made notes as they went through to kind of help everybody else. And it really, really has done an incredible job. I would read that to you, but the font is too small. I'm sure it says something good. But so every year they have a party. They have like a garden party, and everybody comes, and people, you know, wear their big hats and all this, and people stand at the cradles that they tend, and it's just a wonderful thing. And people bring their kids, and it's great to see people walking around this beautiful, beautiful place. You can see how pretty it is. It really is pretty stunning. And people just have a great time doing, what they love to do, because a lot of gardeners don't want you to fool with them. They just want to go out and do it, right? Yeah, just let me go out and do this work. So yeah, it's become an incredible thing. If you want to come to Elmwood, there is an audio tour that you can download. You can come in and point your phone at a QR code and download the audio tour, and it's about an hour and 15 minutes. It's really a good tour. It tells you everything about Elmwood. And I've just told you this much. I mean, the South's first African-American millionaire, Robert Church, whose father was from Holly Springs, he's buried there. All of his people are buried there. And they were really big in the Republican Party in the from the 19 teens on through the Nixon administration. And so, there's just so much there. So we're gonna push on here, and I want to tell you a little bit about me. So I have been I feel like I've lived a magical, charmed life, being able to meet so many people and talk to people, and it makes me happy to look into people's eyes and to kind of know their stories. But I have done a lot of films. I don't know if you've seen any of these on public TV. A lot of them have been on public TV. I just had I did a 3-part documentary series on my hometown of Rolling Fork, because it was destroyed in the tornado last year. So I've spent the last 15 months working on those 3 half-hour documentaries. They just had them on MPB last week. And if any of you would like to see those, find some way to get in touch with me, like a Facebook, or I'll give you my email address and I'll send you so you can see those. Because what I have found out is that these kinds of disasters, like tornadoes and floods and things, they're happening with such regularity that those stories are becoming completely universal. I mean, if it hasn't happened to you, it probably is going to happen to you. You know people who've been through things like that. So I felt like that where I'm sitting, then I was the difference maker in that equation, because I know how to tell a story. And I was willing to take the time and tell this story. And so what I have found out in doing hundreds of hours of interviews with people and just kind of looking at everything that's happened is, I just keep coming back to people have to cooperate. And looking into your faces here today, there are not a lot of places that would have a full room of people. And I hate to say that, but y'all get it. You people here in Union County get it, and I appreciate that, because that's the only way that things are going to work for people. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being the kind of person who wants to help the community. That doesn't happen everywhere. I've done a lot of museum work at the Mississippi Grammy Museum, the Cotton Museum, all this. I did the Elvis Presley Birthplace Museum. I've done 3 big things for them over the past few years. They found the church where Elvis went to church. Has anybody been to the church thing there? Okay, yeah. So we went in and shot in there, and shot like an Assembly of God church service from 1941. And and those people down there were so nice to me. They said, "You know what you're doing, don't you?" And I thought, well, that's dangerous. No, I said, yeah, I do know. I think I do know what I'm doing here, and I can do this. I can tell this story to people who come from all over the world, and they'll get it. So I've done 3 films for them down there, and it's really been nice doing that sort of thing. And then I just did the Sporting Life intro video last year, and it was so great working with Jill. I tell you, we just she was so conversant with the story, it was kind of scary. I mean, I'm just telling you, because most people, when you talk to them about, okay, I'm here to tell your story, you're going to pay me money to tell your story, right? I want to get it right. Most people have no idea what the story is or how to tell it. Jill knew that. And so it was such a pleasure being with somebody. And we worked hard on that too. You know, we kicked it back and forth, and she scanned I don't know how many hundreds of images, but gave me the vision to figure out how to tell you and everybody who walks into this museum those stories. Because when it comes down to it, I do believe that people are going to forget what kind of car they had. People are going to forget all of these things, but you're not going to forget the stories. You know, we are human beings, live and run on stories. So that's where I've been able to be. I've done a few books. I did this book on Overton Park after I did the documentary, and then I did this book on Memphis Blues. I did this book on cotton culture. Kim and I wrote the Elmwood Cemetery book. Surely that's not me. No, it's not me. But Kim and I did that together and still got married. She said, if we can write a book together, we're okay. We do okay. And I got to tell you, when you're married to somebody who runs like a nonprofit organization, there's something that happens to you. And I call it not volunteer, not being a volunteer, it's being voluntold what you're going to do. So I can't tell you how many times she's voluntold me. Guess what? You're going to be Boss Crump. Okay? And then guess what? You're going to be some guy in a top hat. Okay, yeah, honey, I'll do it. You know, so I have played a lot of different characters for her. But I think trying to bring those characters alive to the public is so much fun, and people walk out of there with a new understanding and a new appreciation of things like that. I do want to tell you that, you know, these things that I've told you about me, you know, I am a filmmaker and writer and stuff, but I do have some additional training that I want to tell you about. This is me. In 1967, I was 146 pounds of football playing machine. I was not. I was not a great athlete. But I got to tell you, in Rolling Fork, guess what we did? We played football. Yes, I mean, they didn't care anything about baseball, track, basketball. Forget all that. They used to pick 5 guys. All right, y'all know the basketball team. Everybody else come here. You know? And we talked about football, and we always beat everybody pretty good. You know, we had a great football team in the 1960s. So I do want to tell you about my greatest moment in football. Drew, Mississippi in 1966. This is Archie Manning. Everybody remember Archie Manning? Great quarterback from Drew, Mississippi. So he has done, you know, more for football, you know, certainly Mississippi sports than just about anybody. His sons, Peyton and Eli, you know, record-setting, you know, Hall of Fame inductees, all of this. They are the best. But in 1966, when we pulled up in that yellow school bus to Drew, Mississippi, we walked into the dressing room. The visitors' dressing room was right under the bleachers, and it was about maybe 1/10 the size of this room. And so, but we walked in, and there was a 1949 Plymouth that was painted bright orange, the color of your t-shirt back there, so that it was bright orange, and on the door in letters about this tall it said 007, like James Bond. That was Archie Manning's car. And so we were already in awe. I was just like, oh my God, that must be Archie's car, you know. So we walked by, and he's sitting there on a training table, and he's the only person there. He's as close as Jill is to me now. And we're all walking by, and he's sitting there eating chocolate chip cookies, just looking at every one of us. He stared every one of us down as we walked in there. Well, we got to play them that night, and we were whooping them pretty good. By the third quarter, I think we were up like 35-10, and we were kind of shocked that they even scored against us. Usually we'd skunk them, you know, somebody wouldn't even score. So they had scored some, deep in the third quarter. Coach goes, Willie, get in. And I went, oh, please no. Please don't make me go in. And so he grabs me by my face guard and says, do not let him get outside. And of course the him he was talking about was Archie Manning. Because Archie was so good. I mean, he was like a pro quarterback then. He was probably 6'2" and weighed, nearly 200 pounds or something. We were children out there. He was a man. So we had seen what they were doing, and really it kind of came down to they were running two plays. It was either Archie left or Archie right. And I was praying, some of the best praying I've ever done in my life, please don't let him come over to my side. Well, of course, the first play, he rolls out right to my side, and I'm thinking, oh no. And he comes, I'm thinking he's going to throw the ball to the halfback, No, he tucks the ball and tucks his head, and he's running right toward me. Now, I could possibly have been running away at this point. I'm not sure. But he ran into me, got tripped up, and fell down. And everybody jumped up, and they were patting me up, Willie, you tackled Archie Manning. And I was thinking, no, I didn't. I didn't tackle him at all. So that's my football story. So, yeah. I get to do this, I'm a volunteer for the Memphis Library, and they have a TV station there, and I do a TV show every month, and it's an hour-long interview show, and I told them, I said, if I'm going to do a show, it needs to be an hour long, and I just want me and another person, and we're just going to talk. So I don't know who this guy is with me.
Jerry Lawler.
That's Jerry Lawler. the famous wrestler, Jerry Lawler. He was on the show. He was the nicest guy. He was so nice. And we had a great conversation. In fact, if you ever want to see any of these things, they're on my website. Just Willie Bearden, Willie with a Y.com. And you go to the TV and you can see those. But we had a great talk. He's an artist and just a really nice fella. So we took some pictures afterwards. My producer was taking some pictures. And so I turned to Jerry, I said, hey man, can I wear the crown? He went, no. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough, that is okay. I do not have to wear them, because I was afraid he was going to body slam me. I want to say this, that when you say yes to life, opportunities abound. And I have found that every time I say yes for something, sometimes I'm going to do that thing, and I'm thinking, I do not have time to do this. Why did I say I was going to? And then when I walk out, I'm thinking, thank you, God, for letting me have been here today. And I think so many of us go through the same thing. And I have just tried to learn how to embrace those things and embrace those opportunities and live in the moment while I'm doing those things, because they do make you happy, and I love that. So yes, I said that. Somebody asked me a few years ago, they said, who gave you permission to stand up and talk and all this stuff? And I thought, well, that's probably the rudest thing I've ever heard, but I said, I've read a lot, I've traveled a whole lot, I've worked with people like really all over the world, like film crews and people like that. So I kind of feel like I know people, I have good friends who live in France and England and places like that, and I just know how they are and what I love about them and what I love about the people I live around here and all that. But so I guess I have developed a point of view, and the first film I ever had on TV was a thing called Visualizing the Blues, and I did it for the Dixon Gallery in Memphis, and they had it on TV, and WKNO, which is our public TV station there, they called me the next day and said, "Man, it was really great. What are you going to do next?" And I was like, "Oh God, I didn't think about that." So I went ahead and I did some more stuff with them. But also the next day when I got back from lunch, there was a message on my message machine from this guy, Shelby Foote. And Shelby Foote was a great novelist. He was a great historian. and probably Greenville, Mississippi's favorite son. If you saw the Ken Burns documentary on the Civil War, Shelby Foote was the star of that. He was the star. He even told me that after that thing started airing, he said his book sales went up 10 times. He said, I really started making money after I was on TV on that thing. So, but he called me, and so I was listening to the message, and said, Mr. Bearden, this is Shelby Foote. I sure enjoyed what you had on TV last night. Please give me a call, and gave me his phone number. My first thought was that it was one of my idiot friends trying to sound like Shelby Foote. But it wasn't. I called him, and it was him. And he and I got to be friends on the phone. And he encouraged me. He told me, he said, listen, he said, storytelling is the highest art. And he said, I'm just going to tell you that now. And he said, you need to keep doing this. So every time I talk, I think about Mr. Foote, and I always tell people this, that encouragement might be the greatest gift you can give another human being. And you are around people every day who need encouragement. And you know what? It doesn't have to be any great thing. You just have to, hey, I like how you did that. You know, I like how you talk to your kids. I like the way you look today. You know, yeah, it looks like you're having a great time. It's amazing how much that positive energy will free somebody, because you never know what people are going through. Mr. Foote was, I got to know him, fairly well. He would call me every time I would have something on TV, and I found out that his father and grandfather were from Rolling Fork, my hometown. He loved to talk about Rolling Fork. And so we talk and all this stuff. And so the year before he died in 2004, but the year before, he asked me to come over to his house. And I got to go over to his house, and he had this beautiful place. And I went to his writing room, and he's sitting there smoking his pipe and stuff, you know. But I interviewed him for a couple of hours just on audio tape, and we were talking. And I looked around the room, and it was a pretty good-sized room. But there were copies of his books, I don't know, stacked maybe 3-4 feet high, all around the walls. And I said, well, what's with the books? He said, oh, people send me those books all the time for me to sign. He said, I don't sign them. I said, I don't even send them back. Well, that's not too friendly. Don't send them back. Okay. But he told me that when he got famous, he said, I said, well, what was that like? He said, just imagine being in a restaurant, every fool in there has to come up and interrupt you. I said, okay, there you go. And so I did get to know him, but a few years later, Rhodes College there in Memphis, the guy who runs the libraries, called me and said, man, I've got something you may want to see. He said, we have Shelby Foote's day books. You've seen those red bound books that people, it's every day, kind of their diary books. They had over 40 of those that he had written, and he had left those to them. They said, do you just want to look through? I said, nobody's looked through them. I said, sure. So I went through and looked through a bunch of stuff. I spent a whole day just reading these things. It was fascinating. I mean, a lot of times he would say, today I weigh 154 pounds. Okay, that's good. But he would talk about where he walked and stuff like that. But he also talked about writing and things and his friends, and how much money he was making, and all this was fascinating stuff. So I was looking through this stuff, and there was a piece of wadded up paper. And so I unwadded the paper, and I took a picture of it. Now, Shelby Foote wrote standing up with a dipped pen, okay? So get that, a dipped pen. You cannot read that. You don't know what that says. But so I found this in a box, and I thought, what in the world? I deciphered it, but I'm going to read it to you now. So it says, Memphis, 10 July, 96. Dear Miss Krantz, sorry, but I don't autograph books except for close friends, in the belief that this gives the signing some real meaning. You should have written ahead and thus saved yourself some postage and both of us some trouble. Regards, Shelby. And I thought, that's exactly who he was, you know. You kids get off my yard. You know? But apparently he had not sent it because I guess he had other thoughts, and he crumpled it up and put it in that box. So I was so glad I did take that. Another thing he told me that day as we were getting ready to leave, he said, what time is it? I looked at my watch. He said, it's about 1:45. He said, oh, good, I'm watching the story. And I said, well, what? And he said, well, as the world turns. And I thought, wait a minute, what? I thought, you watch as the world turns? He said, I've been watching as the world turns for 50 years. And I thought, okay. I mean, I was kind of, I was thinking, this is Mr. Historian and stuff, and he's watching. But then I thought, you know what? Here's a guy who's one of the greatest storytellers ever, and he loves a story. He loves that story. So cut to about, I don't know, maybe 8 years later, and I'm sitting at home one morning, and I read in the Commercial Appeal that day was going to be the last episode of what? As the World Turns. So I set my DVR. I just set it. So that night after dinner, I went up and I turned it on. And let me tell you, folks, I never watched As the World Turns. Just let me make that clear. I never watched As the World Turns. My mother watched it. My grandmother watched it. And I'm sure when I was a kid, I was through the room or maybe homesick someday, whatever. I don't actively remember ever watching As the World Turns. I turned the thing on the DVR that night, and I'm telling you, I'm going, oh, well, there's Bob and Nancy, and there's little Joey, and blah, blah. I knew everything, and I thought, wait a second, this is the slowest story in the world. This thing, this has taken 40 years just to unravel, But I watched most of it that night, and because I just wanted to thank Mr. Foote for telling me something that I would have never thought on my own. That, every story has value, and by extension, every person has value. And we don't know what we're missing when we skip over those people. So, I have a new book out, and I have just had the copies for about 2 weeks now. They're selling them in Memphis and stuff. So I wanted to bring some. If you should care to buy a book, that would be fine. If you don't, no harm, no foul. But it's called Mississippi Hippie. That's what my wife called me. And it says A Life in 49 Pieces. And I wrote 49 pieces that tell about my life and growing up in Rolling Fork. And Rita Grimsley Johnson, y'all know her, she's a columnist. She's been in the newspaper for years. She read the book and she wrote me the nicest letter. She said, what a wonderful read and what a rich, dramatic, adventurous life you have led. Said, but the best thing about this multifaceted book is the explanation of why the Delta died. It's the most thorough, thoughtful, and believable explanation I've read, and I've read a few. So I really felt good about that. I've gotten some good reviews recently, and I'm feeling really good about this. I've spent my life in the creative trades and doing, making films and things. So when you make films, you sit in that little dark room for hours and hours and days and months sometimes. And, you work a lot of time by yourself. And you want to make sure that you're still, there's still some sanity in what you're doing, but also that you keep the stories going. And so that's what I hope I've been able to do, with this book, keep the stories going. And, oh, there it is. Okay. And it was fun for me then to go through, and I laid out the book on the inside, did the cover and everything. I just wanted to do it all. My wife was my editor, and she would walk into the room after having read like a new piece or something. She'd go, "What are you trying to say here?" And I would tell her, and she'd say, "Well, you didn't say it, rewrite this." And Jill and I were talking before, you need a tough editor. You need somebody who is not intimidated by you. I always call that, you're writing from somebody other than your mama. Your mama's always going to go, "Oh, honey, that is so good. I can't believe how smart you are." But yeah, you need somebody other than your mama. So I want to end this today by giving you a quote from one of my favorite writers, I get probably my favorite writer, who said, Mississippi is the most interesting place on God's green earth. I said that today. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody got any questions?
Do you sign them?
Yes, I will sign them. Absolutely. Yeah. I ain't no Shelby Foote. Yes, for sure. I'd be happy to.
I was just curious, did you ever meet the great storyteller Jerry Clower?
Yes, I worked with
I-
Jerry Clower twice. Another thing I've done in my career is I've produced a lot of live shows. I do the Blues Music Awards and the Blues Hall of Fame show, and the shows that the Memphis Grammy organization does. I produce those shows. So I've been around the music world and stuff a lot, but I've also produced a lot of like corporate shows, and I've done, I don't know, over 100, around the country. And, and people would ask me, who do you want to bring in? We maybe need a comedian or a band or something like that. So we would do that. And I did a lot of shows with, 10,000 plus people, it's like great big shows. So I'm doing this show, and Jerry Clower is like on to do the show. He came backstage. He was the coolest guy. He was so nice at just cracking jokes and stuff. And we just, he's one of those guys who said, hey, listen, I said, what do you need? He said, how about a microphone? I'm like, okay, I got you there. He just got up and delivered. He was so good, had the people rolling there. About 2 years later, I'm doing a show for international paper. So a totally different client. And we were, I think we were in Chicago or something. And they said, well, we've got a speaker. I said, okay, who is it? They said, Jerry Clower. I said, really, Jerry Clower? So I hadn't heard that. Later that afternoon, he walks in, he goes, Willie Bearden. And I thought, he must have a great secretary. I told him, you've worked with this guy before, But he was so good. Yeah, so Jerry Clower was, he was the quintessential storyteller. He was so good, yeah. Anybody? All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun. If you haven't seen the Sporting Life film, watch that. And I'm pleased to be connected to this place and connected to you. So thank you so much.